Hey, everybody. Welcome into the Mile High Hockey Podcast. I'm Mike Evans going solo one more time. Will Peterson will be back here on Thursday. The Avalanche getting ready to embark on a very, very important six-game homestand. After the first four games of this homestand, we have the trade deadline. I think it's becoming very clear what the Avalanche are going to have to do if they're going to have any hope of making a deep playoff run. Let's deal with the obvious. They got to get Valenchuskin back, but it goes deeper than that. The Avalanche simply are not getting enough help for their top guys. There's a lack of secondary scoring. There's a lack of help. There's a lack of roster depth. And I want to get into all that right here because it's now 6 straight games that the Avalanche have played where the only forwards who have scored have been either Arturi Lehkonen, Martin Necas, or Nathan MacKinnon. That's it. No other forwards have scored in the last 6 games. That's a major problem. Now let's take a look at the culprits here and step right forward. I got to look at my notes here because the numbers are damaging. Casey Middlestat, no goals in his last 12 games. 1 goal in his last 21 games. He has 8 points total over his last 21 games. Ross Colton, no goals in his last 16 games. 1 point in his last 16 games. Miles Wood, in the 9 games that he's come back from injury, 9 games, no goals, no points. Jonathan Drouin, 3 goals in his last 19 games. 2 came in 1 game. And Logan O'Connor, no goals, no points in his last 13 games. This is crushing the Avalanche right now. They have got to find guys to step up and start supporting their top guys. And that's why when I go back to the Mikko Rantanen trade, I wasn't mad at the trade so much because was always my opinion was that if you just don't feel that you're going to sign Mikko Rantanen, you had to trade him. And it certainly looks like they've won that trade. So if you're just grading the trade by itself, Chris MacFarland did a terrific job. But I was critical after the trade for the reasons that Chris MacFarland gave for the trade. When he said, we need more salary cap flexibility. We need to improve our roster depth. And that bugged me, and it bugs me now because Chris MacFarland created this problem. Let's go back and let's look at the timeline here. Chris MacFarland took over as general manager after the Avalanche won the Cup, summer of 2022. Let's look at these players I just mentioned that have been horrible of late. Casey Middlestat. MacFarland traded the Avs former 4th overall pick Bo Byram for Middlestat and signed Middlestat before this season to a 3-year, $17 million deal. He's making $5.7 million per year to give you the production I just laid out. Ross Colton. MacFarland traded a 2nd-round pick for Ross Colton, and last year signed him to a 4-year, $16 million contract, $4 million per year, for the production I just told you. 0 goals, 0 points in the last 16 games. Miles Wood. Chris MacFarland signed him to a 6-year, $15 million deal, $2.5 million per year last season. Logan O'Connor. MacFarland signed him to a 6-year, $15 million, $2.5 million per year this season. Jonathan Drouin signed him to a 1-year, $2.5 million deal prior to this season. So when you tell me that you don't have salary cap flexibility, well, you don't have salary cap flexibility because of these deals. These numbers are real numbers in a hard cap sport. And when you tell me you don't have roster depth, these are the guys that you brought in and paid to produce that roster depth. And it's not happening. And I don't think enough focus has been paid to Chris MacFarland's role in all this. Yes, give him credit for making a good Mikko Rantanen deal. Yes, I guess give him credit for recognizing that the goaltending situation was a mess and needed to be fixed. But again, let's go back to why you found yourself in this mess in the first place. Again, one of the first moves that Chris McFarland made when he took over as the general manager was to trade for Alexander Georgiev and promptly sign him to a 3-year, $10 million contract. And then because it doesn't work out, you have to turn around, trade Georgiev and Kovalenko, one of your top young prospects in a pipeline that doesn't have a lot of really top-end prospects, and a second-round pick to get Mackenzie Blackwood. So I got to push back on this idea that, well, hey, Chris McFarland has done a good job of correcting mistakes. Okay, but why were the mistakes made in the first place? It's kind of like, it's the athletic director at a big college football school. That how many times are you going to give him a chance to hire the next football coach? At some point, you got to hold the guy who's created the hole that he's trying to dig out of. You got to hold that guy accountable, right? I mean, these are all facts here, people. The performance of guys that you have gone out, acquired over the last couple of years, given up assets for, paid, are not performing. And now you find yourself, after the Mikko Rantanen deal, saying, oh, woe is us. We don't have enough salary cap flexibility, and our roster isn't deep enough, especially when it comes to our bottom six forwards. Who created the problem? And so when you look at what's going to happen here over the next couple of weeks, let's just keep that in mind. I'm not arguing that the Avalanche have to go out and make moves at the trade deadline. They do. Yeah, I mean, you can't count on Casey Middlestat, Ross Colton, Miles Wood, Jonathan Drouin, Logan O'Connor. You can't just expect, after all these numbers that I laid out, that they're suddenly going to just turn their whole seasons around and the Avalanche are going to be loaded for bear come playoff time. They're going to have to try to make moves in order to save this season. And that is on Chris McFarland. And hey, if Chris McFarland can pull it off, kudos to him. Talk about him as being the general manager of the year in the NHL. But right now, when we look at the state of the Avalanche, let's acknowledge the players who aren't performing, who brought them here, and who paid them. And so keep that in mind as we take a look at the current state of the Avalanche and the really daunting job that Chris McFarland has ahead of him. Because not only are you going to be trying to make deals, but you're going to have to try to get players back in return that give you the boost that you need, while understanding that you're going to be telling a team that you're trading with, you want Casey Middlestat, yeah, you got to take 2 more years at $5.75 million per year, and you got to do that, and how much are you going to give us in return? You see where I'm saying with this, where I'm going with this? So it's a big homestand for the Avalanche coming up. It's a huge trade deadline. I'll be fascinated to see what happens. I'm hearing a lot of talk out there from some of you as Avalanche fans who are saying, hey, we just need to recognize that this isn't our year. The uncertainty about Val, the uncertainty about Gabe Landeskog, and the way that some of these players have not lived up to expectations, maybe we're just going to have to refocus and kick the can down the road till next year. I'm starting to hear more of that. I'm not ready to go there yet. I'm not ready to tank on a season. I know they're 9-9-2 in their last 20 games. It doesn't look like a team that's ready to really go on a late season burst here and on into the playoffs and deep into the playoffs. I'm not willing to give up on a team that still has a core like the Avalanche have, especially if you're able to add Valeri Nichushkin back into it. But in order for this team to get to where they need to be, they're going to have to make some moves. And it's going to be up to Chris McFarland to dig himself out of the hole that he has dug. We'll be back again on Thursday. Will Peterson will be back, and we'll have the start of this homestand to react to. Thank you for joining us here on the Mile High Hockey Podcast.